From the Commonwealth Club of California, this is Climate One. I'm Greg Dalton. When Secretary of State John Kerry signed the Paris Climate Agreement recently, he held his 2-year-old granddaughter on his lap. She probably knows quite a bit about climate change already, and today on the show we'll explore what other kids are learning and doing about climate disruption. In the second half of the hour, we'll hear what 3 high school and college students in the Bay Area are already doing to act upon what they learned in the classroom. Their knowledge and their action will inspire you and maybe make you think about what you were doing at their age. In our first half hour, we'll learn what teachers, pediatricians, and museums are doing to frame climate as a concern for California's children today. We're not talking about 2100 here, people. We're pleased to welcome now 2 climate education experts. Minda Berbecco is Programs and Policy Director at the National Center for Science Education, a nonprofit based in Oakland. And Alex Whistler is former CEO of the Chabot Space and Science Center, where he led development of the Bill Nye Climate Lab. He's now a principal at Estelling Labs, which advises educational organizations and museums. Please welcome them to Climate One. Minda Berbecco, let's talk with you and go to San Diego, where the PTA, the Parent Teacher Association, approached you because they were trying to get more education in schools about climate. So tell us when they approached you.
Sure. They were interested in bringing more climate change into their local schools. They saw it as an issue not just for politicians, but one for their classrooms and for students. And they wanted the PTA to step up to do that. So if you have never been to a PTA convention before, it's quite an amazing experience. So it's like a political convention, but instead of people jostling about the politician they're going to vote for, instead they're all advocating for their children's education. So it's thousands of people shouting and dancing and so on. And so they wanted to bring a resolution to the PTA to talk about climate change. And it was an incredible experience. I've never been around more passionate people. So they brought it to the convention, and there were many interesting conversations that happened with different PTAs around the state. Should this be considered a children's issue? Should this be something that schools should be addressing? And some people didn't agree. Some people felt like, no, this is something that parents should be talking about, or this is really more political. But in fact, in the end, it was the PTA of California, the majority of the folks agreed that climate change is a children's issue, and the PTA should be doing more to help schools bring climate change into their classrooms.
And now they're trying to take it to the national PTA, which how's that going? There's nothing more political than a PTA.
That's true. But you have to keep in mind that everyone there is really advocating for their children. So everyone there really has their kids' best interests at heart. And I think that was my biggest takeaway from that. And, it might be a bit of a fight and it might be a big challenge, but they were such strong supporters, and I feel like the parents and teachers of California are such strong supporters of climate change education that they can really bring it there.
Alex Whistler, you headed a Chabot Space and Science Center when the Bill Nye Climate Lab was brought there. So tell us about the development and introduction of that lab. Bill Nye is a rock star in science, but tell us about that development.
Absolutely, but first I want to just reference something that Minda mentioned, because as a result of the work that you did and that the San Diego PTA did, Cool the Earth, which is a great nonprofit environmental education program based here in the Bay Area, is now working in San Diego. And so they reached out to us, and so there's like this great little ecosystem going here. Bill Nye and the Climate Lab. Well, we recognize the fact that it was a real challenge. This is now 7 or 8 years ago. To how do we communicate climate change education to kids, or the issues around climate change to kids? And so we sought to do that in a way that presented a positive message. So we did 3 things. One, we wanted to talk about what is the science that we know? What do we know? How do we know that carbon is increasing and is causing a rise in temperatures? Then, what do we do about it? And so there we activated a series of programs for the kids to come in and not only think about what the science is, but also what they could personally do, or maybe encourage their parents to do. And I think a lot of the environmental and climate change education programs sort of seek to do similar things. Cool the Earth is another one, Alliance for Climate Education, a third, there's many. And I think, at the heart of it all, it's around how do we give our kids a positive vision of the future? Because if we just talk about, apocalypse and hopelessness and pointlessness, it's easy to give up. But I think there's a lot to be hopeful about and positive about. And I know that's the energy that Bill brings to it. And as you probably saw in the press, he continues to fight this fight, even with some political figures in our national leadership. And so bottom line, it's communicating a message about and empowering the kids. I think that's the other part, so that they can feel empowered to do something, that they don't feel powerless, and that also that they become then advocates within their own family, within their own school. We were having conversations earlier about some great work some of the high school kids you're going to hear from, the work they're doing in their schools. So I'm actually very optimistic that our youth are in the vanguard of this movement.
And one key to making it upbeat is making it fun. Cool the Earth does things like have student plays. Actually, the youngest person ever interviewed at Climate One was a 6th grader who I think was the villain in a school play.
Perfect.
He was Mr. Carbon, right?
Carbon.
And he scared away the polar bear, and the polar bear went running away. So what is Cool the Earth? They make games. How do they make it fun for kids to learn about climate?
So the Cool the Earth program, I think, is genius. They go into the schools and present a play in an all-school assembly, and the characters in the play are teachers and parents in the school acting out these various roles. So there's evil Mr. Carbon, and there's the wonderful Coda that we're trying to save Coda's life. And but then the message that the kids take away from that program is, now you can go home and we want you to take some actions, and we want to get your parents to take some actions. And then when they do those actions, this is typically over a 4-week period, they come back to school and they get little rewards, a sticker or a pencil. And if you haven't been to one of these programs or seen these kids engaged in this, I highly recommend it because it's so powerful. It's not high tech, but it's very high touch, and the kids get emotionally engaged, and the parents take the actions. And as a result, Cool the Earth has seen now over nearly 200,000 students, 500 schools, and we're tracking the carbon, and we believe we've reduced carbon by 250 million tons.
Pretty cool, huh? Pretty cool. Minda Berbecco, climate has become political, controversial. So what's it like for a teacher in a classroom to think, well, I'm not sure if I know this science is complicated. It's pretty new since I went to school maybe. And the parents might get upset. I'm not sure what my principal thinks. So tell us about teachers bringing climate into the classroom and some of the pressures they face.
Well, it's tricky. In some communities where teachers have a lot of support, it's not an issue at all. And in fact, what we'll find, like with San Diego, they were really strongly advocating for more opportunities to bring climate change in the classroom. But unfortunately, in other communities, there is a lot of resistance to it. Folks think that it's political, and it's not just parents coming in or not just students coming in and challenging the science, but sometimes you might get a school board member. So I was working with one teacher in an eastern state, and I won't identify where, but he had a challenge where the school board member demanded every single one of the pieces of material that he had on climate change that he was distributing to students. And then it had an outside quote unquote expert come in and just go through the materials with a red pen and say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. He sent those materials to me. They were extraordinarily well cited. He cited the very radical groups like NASA and NOAA in all of his work. And so all his T's were crossed, all his I's were dotted. And yet he still had this challenge. The nice thing, though, is that a lot of times when these challenges come up, teachers feel like, oh my gosh, I'm alone, and you're really not, because there is a very strong community that supports climate change education. And sometimes it's just a matter of reaching out to other teachers, reaching out to the Science Teacher Association in your state, or even reaching out to parents in your community just to make sure that you have that support. So when someone does come down on you, you can say, look, go talk to all them, and they can support you.
And a corollary issue is the battle over textbooks, right? You deal with
Sure.
evolution as well as other climate change. So tell us about the textbooks, and is evolution kind of making its way back in, and is climate being squeezed out?
So that's a great question. We've seen a lot of similarities between the pushback between evolution and climate change. They're a little bit different, and one of the big challenges that climate change suffers from, and this is California specific, a study came out this past year that really evaluated how are textbooks addressing climate change? And what they found is there's a lot of hedging in the language. We might think this. Scientists believe this, whereas we don't talk about gravity in the same way. We don't talk about things, other areas of science in that way. And so there's this very kind of subtle, underhanded approach to climate change. And in defense of the authors, they want their books to be accepted, and they know that people are going to rise up and challenge the way climate change is approached unless they hedge their language. But as a result, students come away thinking, well, they might think that climate change is happening. It could be happening, whereas we have such a strong body of evidence about it. It shouldn't be approached in that way.
Alex Whistler, this gets to the heart of science, where things that are well established are still called theories, and things that are not fully known. There's always a little bit of doubt in science, and scientists like to test things and test their doubt, and that seems like America's having a hard time understanding that.
Well, I'm struggling right now because there was a great piece recently that I blogged out on the misunderstanding of what a theory is. So in science, a theory is a well-established set of principles that have been scientifically tested over a long period of time and validated. So that's the theory of gravity. I mean, that's the theory of evolution. But people in the public, they think, well, I have a theory that if I do X, Y, and Z, something will happen. Well, no, that's not a theory. That's a hypothesis, okay? And so, but we do get tied up in this notion of the word theory. And so that's just one thing for everyone to carry away. When you hear someone saying, well, it's just a theory, we'll say, well, theories are, in science terms, a theory is a very powerful construct. And so it's not just a theory. It's validated by, in some cases, hundreds of years of scientific experimentation. So yeah, when you were talking about that's exactly where I was going to go. So you fed me that question.
Tell us about what you're doing down at Moffett Field. There's a cool new science center that's going to happen down there. Alex Whistler, right near Google and Moffett Field.
Right. So Google has a plan and an obligation to build a brand new 90,000 square foot STEM/STEAM public educational facility right there at Moffett Field, right next to NASA Ames. And right now we're working with them to try to envision what that might be. I think it's going to be in a couple of years, but it's very exciting. I think we're talking to a lot of program partners, folks like the Girl Scouts of Northern California, Tech Bridge. There's a lot of great work, and all of those not only do work in STEM education, but they also do a lot of work in climate. So I think more and more STEM and climate is all blending into one because that's one of the reasons why we want young people to get into the sciences and engineering is to solve and tackle the challenges that climate and other issues are bringing before us.
We're talking about climate education at Climate One. I'm Greg Dalton. My guests are Alex Whistler, former head of Chabot Space and Science Center, and Minda Burbecko from the National Center for Science Education. You can join the conversation using our Twitter handle @Climate1. I'd like to go to our lightning round and ask Minda and Alex a brief yes or no or single answer question. Starting with Minda Burbecko, this is yes or no. Liberal people who object to GMO foods usually base their arguments on ideology more than science. Yes or no?
Oh, I can't answer that. It
Alex?
depends.
Yes, absolutely.
Alex Whistler, Bill Nye is the coolest nerd ever.
Yes.
That was an easy one. Minda Burbecko, which state outlawed sea level rise in 2012?
I believe it was North Carolina.
North Carolina is the one. Minda Burbecko, the governor of which state banned mention of sea level rise by state employees?
I believe that was Florida.
Correct. That ends the lightning round. How did they do?
Well,
I think they did pretty
glad you
well.
didn't ask me those hard ones.
Why does he get the easy one?
I know. Yeah, Bill Nye's cool.
We're talking about climate education at Climate One. Alex Whistler, what can be done, I want to ask both of you, to get more girls, young women involved in STEAM and STEM careers? There's a gap there, and we need those skills to address the climate challenge.
There's a number of approaches that are underway, and if it was a simple problem, I think we would have already solved it. I mentioned just briefly earlier, programs like the Girl Scouts of Northern California, Tech Bridge, Girls Who Code. There's a number of informal programs that are underway. And there's also a number of formal programs, even in the university level. But I just stumbled across a study that I just found so fascinating where I believe it was Harvey Mudd College made a big effort to increase the number of women taking computer science. And they actually got it up to, half the people in their program were women. And then they graduated, and most of them didn't take jobs in computer science because there's cultural barriers. These are deeply ingrained issues. So I think the short answer is we have to do everything. Most of these programs are necessary. None of them seem to be sufficient, and we just need to keep plugging away. I think it's one of these things that's going to take time. It's a cultural change.
Minda Berbecco, I have a 12-year-old daughter. I encouraged her to take a coding camp this summer. Nah, not interested.
Uh-oh.
So I don't know whether that's
We need artists too.
comes from Disney Channel. There's no female coders on Disney Channel. I don't know. So what's being done to get more women into STEAM?
There's a lot being done, and I think the challenge that you're pointing to is that sometimes maybe she's just not interested right now, but that doesn't mean she won't be either. And I can give you an anecdote from myself that I was not interested in science technology at all, and I ended up at the totally wrong school for me. I went to Carnegie Mellon, which is a computer science school, and I was a psychology major, and as part of it though, graduating as a psychology major, I had to take all these computer programming classes, and if I had known that when I applied, I certainly would not have done it. But there was a little twisting of my arm, and I use that stuff all the time now.
Yeah.
And it actually forced me into science and technology. And when I wanted to go get my degree, my advanced degree in biology later on, I had all this background in science that I was like at the time, not gonna need it. So sometimes in those cases, you need to figure out a way to encourage folks, even if they're like, that's not for me, you can encourage women in other ways.
What are some things you've learned from kids, whether either the kids that you encounter through your work for the National Center for Science Education? What are some things you've learned from kids about climate?
Oh, everything. First of all, I think that one of the greatest things I've learned from the PTA, from being on the board of the California Science Teachers Association, and also from organizations like ACE and Cool the Earth, is how powerful kids are. They have an unending amount of energy, an unending amount of enthusiasm, and if you can get them excited about stuff, they are just an extremely powerful voice to bring to the table. And not only that, but if you want change to happen, having a child come home and say, why are we driving to school every day when it's only 3 blocks away? Can we walk? I mean, those are the things that get parents thinking and get adults changing too.
Alex Whistler, the Bill Nye Science Lab over at Chabot, hundreds of thousands of kids have gone through there. Are you able to track the impact of the change of that, or is it more nuanced and iterative?
I mean, I think, we can certainly measure the number of kids, the number of, the learning that they do when they're there. I think it is more challenging to track the long-term impact. What happens when they go home? What happens in 5 years? Do they get into STEM programs, et cetera? I think it's one of the fallacies of these, well, not a fallacy. I think sometimes there's an expectation that any individual program is going to change an individual's life or save the world. It's not that, but it is all of it combined. And I think it's more about trends. And I think when you see the fact that the PTA, adopts this. I mean, 15 years ago, absolutely not, When you see the fact that we've gone from, debating these issues to COP21 now being ratified yesterday, I mean, these huge, huge changes. But I think we're all impatient. We know that the challenge is greater than what is being done to date. But I think we should also be optimistic, and particularly with our kids, because they are absolutely, as you say, in the vanguard. They're one by one changing the world, and their expectations and their actions are going to be a lot different than what I experienced growing up, and I think it's going to be good, actually.
Great. Minda Berbecco, one big change, the next generation science standards, very political in this country. West Virginia just voted them down. Where do those stand, and what are they going to do?
NGSS is really interesting. So I should say that it only makes the news when it's challenged, and it never makes the news when people just accept it and adopt the standards. They're really great standards. We adopted them here in California, so that's fantastic. The nice thing about them is that they really integrate in solutions and problem solving, engineering design into other aspects of that we're more familiar with, like biology, chemistry, those kinds of things. But because they include things like the word evolution or the word climate change, they are very politically hot button topic in certain areas, and so certainly that is a challenge. What we've found that's worked really well is when communities say, no, these are good science standards. Climate change is one little piece of it, and first of all, climate change is science, it should be included, but you can't throw this whole giant document away and all the things that would come from it just because we don't politically agree with this one little piece of it.
We're going to go to your questions. We'd like to invite you to be part of the conversation. There's a microphone over there, and we have 11 minutes left. We invite you to come up and state your name and join us, and we'll get through as many questions as we can. This is often the most engaging part of the, don't be shy now. There's no grades, no grades, no judgment. Who's going to be the bold first person to go up there and ask about learning about climate change or anything else? You can go up to the microphone. We need you to thank you for being the brave first one.
Don't make it like the speed round where we don't.
Yeah, don't give us yes or no.
Don't make me call on you.
I
Yes.
still feel like you got off very easy on that.
He did. Let's go to our audience questions. Welcome to Climate One.
Hi, thank you so much. I love it that you guys brought up Harvey Mudd, Claremont Colleges Unite. So I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit more about coding and STEM, but also the crossover between these coding boot camps and getting women into STEM, and also the environment. If you could talk about that crossover.
Yeah.
Alex Whistler?
I'll give it a shot. I'm not sure what you mean by the crossover. I mean, I guess, can you just say, what do you mean by the crossover?
So, like environmental technology, that's kind of boosting up in these startups that are coming up, and some
Right.
are failing and some are trying to emerge. But I guess, especially with like energy storage and like water smart software and
Okay.
Klima and stuff
Right.
like that.
Okay. So I think what I hear you saying is that how can we ensure we get a diversity of perspectives into not only environmental science but also computer sciences, because computer sciences underlie how you're going to solve a lot of these challenges. I mean, we're going to need to have women coders and coders from a variety of perspectives. I think what has to happen is that, well, coding is an interesting thing, okay? I actually took a little bit of a deep dive into coding. And let's just be honest about something. It's not for everyone. I mean, it's kind of a hard, tricky thing. You have to really want to get engaged in it. And it's not like something simple. And it's learning a new language. But I also think it's something that can be interesting and challenging and also creative. So I think maybe if it's reframed a little bit as something that's not for boring, geeky guys, but it's something that's also for hip, cool everyone, that we might crack it a little bit more.
And Rebecca, any thoughts on the crossover technology?
Yeah, I think that's a great question that we don't spend enough time actually talking about. And I think that when we talk about coding, we talk about a very specific thing as opposed to sort of a possible answer to a lot of our challenges. And I think one really good example of that is in schools, oftentimes we feel like we're just learning this one specific topic and it's not relevant. And so if you're learning coding, it's not relevant to these other fields. And so maybe bringing it in project-based, sort of reversing that and say, here's the big question, how are we going to answer it? And coding is one of the ways that we can answer it. So just as a small anecdote, a really good example is I got my PhD in biology and I was really interested in being outdoors and in the environment. And then I spent all this time doing statistics. And I was like, oh, this is horrible. I hate statistics. And so it didn't occur to me that, of course, you need all these things. I was doing chemistry. I was doing statistics. I was doing calculus, and I needed it in order to answer these questions that I genuinely was interested in about the environment. And I think the more we can bring those things in, the better it will be for people to understand the usefulness of how these things integrate together.
Let's talk about climate solutions. And Rebecca, a lot of times the science is thought about as the problem. There's too much energy being emitted because of heat. We've basically been burning stuff for 150 years, and that's disrupted the energy balance on the climate. What kind of education is happening around solutions?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. And I think this goes into some of the things that Alex was talking about. I think that maybe traditionally people approached climate change as it's all of these problems. It's very negative. Polar bears, are dying. Those kinds of things. And the new way that teachers are approaching it, which I think is brilliant, is here's all the science, here are the problems, but what are we going to do about it? And really putting it in children's hands that you actually can make a difference. And whether that's through technology, through coding, whatever avenue you're going to take, there's a lot of opportunity there.
Alex Whistler, solution. Science tends to focus on problems, right, and what's not known, but a lot of science is needed for battery breakthroughs, big innovations, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things we did at Chabot with Bill Nye is we had a sort of an ideation station where kids could sit down and draw out their own solutions, their own, crazy ideas, and then we took those and some of the best ones we actually turned over to local artists, and then they actually built these little things that these kids imagined.
Cool.
So it was taking it from a wacky idea to something that could actually possibly be, and they could actually see a prototype of it. So I think it's that on that thread, continuing that positive message that you can come up with ideas. Not only can you come up with them, but we can actually prototype them, we can build them and test them and see if we can make them work. And I think that's where the kids get excited.
And they don't have the adult filter of, it can't be done, or
Zero.
things are done a certain
Zero.
way, right?
Zero.
Minda Berbecco, tell us about some of the mentors that helped you in your education to get where you are. Mentorship is a big part of education, not just what you learn in the books. Who are some mentors?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's been so many over the years. It's hard to pick out one or two in particular. But I think that more so than my mentors, it's worth talking about who are the mentors in the state of California and who are the mentors in this area. And it's really nice to look at programs like Cool the Earth, but also ACE and even one that we're running at the National Center for Science Education, getting scientists into the classrooms, because mentors can come in lots of different shapes and sizes. They can be parents, they can be a scientist who comes and works with a class, they can be, in the case of ACE, it's young 20-year-olds who are going up and working with kids in their local communities. So they come in lots of different shapes and sizes, and I think it's worth highlighting that it's really the community coming together around climate change that really makes the big impact.
Let's go to our next audience question. Welcome.
Hi, how's it going? My name is Jason. And my question is, as I understand it, the United Nations reports that if you're looking at like a pie chart of the causes of climate change, 40% is due to energy, 40% is due to industrial agriculture, and 20% is miscellaneous, like a variety of reasons. But when I come to events like this, I find that everyone, there's a lot of momentum behind energy, transitioning to sustainable energy. But when I come to events like this, I find that most people are not aware that industrial agriculture is such a huge part of the problem. Like, it's basically equally like a part of the problem as transitioning to sustainable energy, and at the same token, transitioning from industrial agriculture to sustainable agriculture is equally a part of the solution. So I'm kind of just wondering, why is there such a gap in that education?
Thank you. I should mention that we've done numerous programs at Climate One on that topic, including one very lively recently where we had some vegan activists and some cattle ranchers. It got really hot and rowdy in here. So I encourage you to look at the Climate One podcast for programs. That was about cowspiracy. We've done a lot of things, but fair point, food, Minda Berbecco, is often overlooked, and it's a big part of the solution.
So it's interesting you say that, because I think in the public sphere, we talk a lot more about energy when we talk about climate change. But interestingly, since the Next Generation Science Standards came up, there's actually quite a few other opportunities in science classrooms to talk about climate change. One is the most basic, is the carbon cycle. And when you're addressing the carbon cycle, certainly talking about agriculture is one of the ways that teachers address climate change. So I think it is interesting, sort of in the public sphere, we address energy, we're very focused on it, but in classrooms it tends to be more nuanced, and there are opportunities to talk about different impacts of climate change from these different components.
Alex Whistler, is food going to be part of this new Google museum down there?
I hope so. Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the things we're talking about. I was thinking about your question, though. I wonder if this is just a hypothesis, not a theory, that maybe it's easier to get our brains around the energy challenges, whether it's oil or fossil fuels, et cetera. And whereas food is at such a broad range of issues that pile up together, maybe it's not as linear or as simplistic. That's just a guess.
But it's something that people can, as Michael Pollan says, you can vote with your fork every day. You can affect every day. That's both an opportunity and makes it hard. Let's go to our next question.
Hello, my name is Drew Lehman, and I appreciate, Rebecca, what you said about statistics and those kinds of tools. There's a very interesting study done by the American Geosciences Institute about the gap between what's taught in colleges and universities and what's demanded in the workforce. You all, myself, have had a career in the environmental profession. I just wonder, as environmental professionals, how do you see workforce development in underserved communities so you engage students in the junior high school, and through college so they're adequately prepared for careers in the environmental profession so they can effectuate long-term environmental change?
We have to do this quickly, and I want to apologize to our two questioners. I hope you can ask a question in the other segments. We definitely want to hear from you.
Greg, can we put reference web links or anything?
Sure. Yeah.
So I just tackled this question in a blog I wrote last week, so I'm going to do a shameless promotion. If you go to my website, einstellunglabs.com, I talked about this very issue, and it also references a number of other articles and references.
And no one can spell Einstellung, so Google Alex Whistler. And I think we're going to get to that in the, we have other parts today that we're going to address, kind of that career track, et cetera, though we're recording two separate programs for broadcast at different times. We have to end it there. I'd like to thank Minda Berbecco from the National Center for Science Education and Alex Whistler, a consultant and former head of the Chabot Center for Science and Space, and our audience here at the Commonwealth Club. We're going to go to our second segment, but let's give a thanks to Alex and Minda.